Thank you for tuning into this video about Congress, its powers, and a few little pieces of information that are important to know. Now, first of all, just wanted to say thank you for bearing with the fact that my child's once again out sick. I'll hope to be back in the classroom tomorrow, and we'll continue our simulation then in more depth and detail. Otherwise, let's get started. For today's Abernathy reading, you read about the three roles that a congressman can really take on. And these roles are not really clearly defined. When I see a congressman, I don't automatically go, oh, that guy's acting as a trustee, and oh, that guy's acting as a delegate. But sometimes you can pick out quotes. You can pick out quotes when a congressman is talking about like why they voted for a bill. And they may say, the people of my district support this initiative. They've always told me that they back this up. They've called my office over and over again saying how much they want this initiative to pass. Now, those politicians are ones that I would label as delegates. They're trying their best to represent what their district or state wants. And I have an example here in our own state of Ron Kind. Ron Kind is a Democrat from that southwestern district that's kind of odd shaped in the state of Wisconsin. Now, he's a Democrat, but he tends to support a lot of gun rights bills. That's because his region does have a lot of hunters. And a lot of those people support Ron Kind, but there's one thing they kind of care about on the side from being supporting a Democrat, and that might be their hunting rights or their gun rights. And Ron Kind tends to support what the people in his district want for that initiative. So a congressman that's kind of thinking about what's going on in their district, listening to what the people of their district want, they're acting more in that delegate role. They want to be the mouthpiece of their district or state. So if you call their office, if you write letters to them, you're going to have potentially a lot more influence than you would over like a trustee. Someone that thinks they're more of a trustee for the public would just get elected and then use their best judgment. So whenever I see someone talk about, oh, the people of this district elected me to make these tough decisions, and I've decided to do this, whenever I hear someone doing that, I think trustee. They're elected into the position, they've been voted in because they have the best expertise or personal convictions. You're trusting them to make the best call. Whereas in the other one, you are delegating them to make the call for you. Trustee, trusting them. Delegate, delegating. So those are both fine and dandy, but what about a politico? A politico is kind of the middle of the road politician in many ways. It's someone that picks and chooses when they want to act as a delegate and when they want to act as a trustee. So when they're on television explaining why they voted for a bill, one time it might be them explaining, oh, the people of my district have really spoken to me. And then the next time they might say, oh, the people of my district elected me to make the tough decisions. And this is how I voted. So a politico picks and chooses what's best for them to choose from, which kind of seems a little shady. Kind of seems like they're trying to take the best of both worlds. But that's just what it is. That's just what the politico is. Now let's dive into powers of Congress, and this is really important because you've been talking about bills. You've been talking about bills that you want to pass through our mock simulation of Congress, and it's important to realize that not every bill that everyone has written is actually something Congress can do. Remember, Congress has very clearly outlined enumerated powers: taxation, commerce clause, naturalization, coining money, declaring war, raising and funding the military, establishing federal courts, and of course the necessary and proper clause to do all those things. But that doesn't mean they can do everything you've been talking about. We have a health committee. But really, where in the Constitution does it say that Congress has the ability to manage health? We have an education committee. But where in our Constitution does it say anything about education? What Congress has done is kind of manipulate the system a little bit. Using the Commerce Clause and using grants, you can try to influence the states when it comes to health and when it comes to education. So, for example, You have a lot of education grants, and those grants can influence the states into passing different initiatives. So if you were to want to change the start time of schools, you might have to tie that to a grant. And of course, then it would have to go through a lengthier process through the Ways and Means Committee. Now, let's say you want to do something with healthcare. You might have to adapt this as well. For example, when the Supreme Court brought up whether or not Obamacare was constitutional, they deemed that basically fining people for not having health insurance was a tax, that this was taxation, which is well within Congress's power. So, kind of using different parts of the powers can create even bigger powers, go into fields you never imagined, like education and healthcare. Now, aside from those powers listed in the Constitution, it's important to think about some big conceptual powers. For example, when we talk about Congress, their big power is often called the power of the purse. Power of the purse, think of purse as in like a little bag of money. Back when you kind of had you didn't have a bank, you would carry around money with you. I think of like any fantasy film, you have people carrying around little purses of money. Those purses of money are what you spend things on. And in this case, Congress has the power of money. The president can want to do whatever he wants, but he can't do it without funding. So Congress is the one that provides all the funding. At any moment in time, they could cut back on tons of different programs. They could cut back on Social Security. They could cut back on Obamacare. They could cut back on the military. They could cut back on the bureaucracy, on the post office. All of that is possible because the power of the purse is very, very strong. And when the framers created the Constitution, they wanted to make sure that the power of the purse was never really combined with the power of the sword. That was seen as way too powerful. They wanted to have a separation of powers between the purse and the sword. So Congress is given the ability to control the money, whereas the president is given the commander in chief role, the power of the sword. So, power of the purse, controlling all the money, is really powerful, especially at a time when the framers were thinking about okay, Parliament, they weren't looking out for the best interests of the colonists. They were taxing them without representation. They were not really looking out for what was best in the colonies. They were just looking to protect their financial interests in the colonies. So now they're entrusting Congress to really be the people behind the budget. And Congress is charged with trying to develop that budget for the United States. And we'll talk about the budget process and finances later on in this unit. Secondly, Congress has the ability to pass laws. So they can pass laws and laws with finances on the line. Whereas if the president wanted to do like an executive order, which we'll talk about next unit, he would not necessarily have money attached to it because he doesn't have that power of the purse. But Congress can make laws dealing with money. You already know about franking. I feel like I don't need to explain it any further. Okay, now oversight is extremely important. I can't emphasize enough that it's bigger than a power. Oversight is a responsibility. Oversight is the power and responsibility to basically oversee the executive branch and to make sure things are being handled properly. For example, let's say we had a president that wanted to fund some sort of big project, and he took part of something that Congress funded through their lawmaking and power of the purse and diverted that money to a different project. Congress's job is to be aware that is happening, to be aware that they can investigate this, they can have hearings, they can bring people in, they can ask them questions. Congress has the ability to bring in people and ask them lots of questions, and this oversight then can do things. They can realize that the president is diverting this money, and they could cut off the money. They have the power of the purse. So financially speaking, they can take that oversight ability and change things. Let's say there's a big E. coli outbreak in some sort of food product. They can investigate with the Food and Drug Administration to see what's happening. And then Congress has the ability, through their lawmaking and their power of the purse, to change something. Let's say there's a problem with the Department of Education. They can bring in the Secretary of Education, they can investigate further. They can do investigations that can find out interesting things. If you think about all the impeachment inquiries that have ever existed, all of them are really investigations. They're overseeing something that's going on with the executive branch, making sure everything is legit. So think of all that. That's oversight. So a lot of what committees do is hold hearings and oversee what the executive branch is doing and investigate. And that's an important power because they can see what's going on and they can make sure that people are being held responsible for their actions. So the executive branch can't just do whatever they want and get away with it. The executive branch, the legislative branch has the ability to kind of check that. Oversight is one of their major checks. Next thing is going to be basically consent of appointments. So consent of appointments. There's a little grammatical error on the screen there for you. I will fix it really quickly. Essentially, what happens is when the president wants to appoint someone to a major position, think like the Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. She's featured right on the screen in front of you. When he wants to appoint someone into a major position of power, FBI Director, Secretary of Education, Secretary of Defense, wants to appoint someone as Vice President if the Vice President were to step down, wants to appoint someone to be the CIA Director or to be the Press Secretary. The President seeks out an appointment, and the appointment has to be approved by the Senate. Now, it doesn't have to be approved by the entire Congress. So this is just a power of the Senate that's a little special. And they approve all these appointments to executive positions as well as judicial positions. So they have the ability to kind of check the executive branch in monitoring some of their leadership, approving the leadership in those positions. Now let's talk about war making. Congress, of course, has the power to declare war. They don't have the power to control the troops. That's something that the president is in charge of. That's the commander-in-chief role. But Congress has the ability to declare war. So the president, he can use his troops wherever he wants, but officially declaring war, that's a part of Congress's power. Now, we'll talk about under the presidency that this is kind of controversial. The president could drop troops in at a random location and start a conflict or end a conflict or attack a wanted terrorist. All that stuff is possible without a declaration of war, which can create interesting potential problems. If you go and topple a government without declaring war and leave it unstable, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? That's where controversy could lie. Now, Congress has the ability to raise armed forces. So they develop the budget to the military. They develop the budget determining how many troops there are, how many tanks there are, how many planes there are, and that kind of determines what the size of our armed forces is. And of course, the Senate approves treaties. So not only do they check the president when it comes to appointments, but they also have to approve any treaty with a two-third vote. So setting up a treaty with another country can be really powerful. Think of like NATO. It's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, in which you have a bunch of North Atlantic countries in a military alliance together. That military alliance is signed on to by the Senate. They approve the treaty after the president basically negotiates it. Now, this doesn't always, end up perfectly. Sometimes the president will negotiate a major treaty, bring it back home, and the Senate will reject it. And that could cause, potentially a lot of problems. After World War I, Woodrow Wilson came back with a treaty, and the Senate rejected it, leaving basically the U.S. government outside of a League of Nations that was built to basically prevent another world war. And Some would say that that was one of the reasons that the U.S. wasn't able to check or kind of restrict the next World War before it started. One of the last major powers is, of course, impeachment. The power of impeachment is the ability to not only investigate and oversee, but to bring charges against a president or a justice in the Supreme Court or any federal judge. Uh, the power to eventually even remove if needed. How does it work? Well, the House brings charges. You should be kind of aware of what's going on right now. Right now, there's an impeachment inquiry. If that inquiry were to go any farther, it would potentially go to a vote in committee and a vote of the House as a whole. So the House would bring the charges. That is considered impeaching someone. It's charging them with a crime. You guys know impeachment can be done for, treason, high crimes, and misdemeanors. Now, after the impeachment charges are brought against someone, we end up with a trial in the Senate. And the Senate has the ability to then remove a sitting official if they see fit. Now, you should know that no president has been removed from office, but there have been a few federal judges that have been removed at different times in our history. The last thing to point out about our government and our Congress is that power can kind of change for Congress. Power can change and control can change with how the government is made up. And in particular, we're talking about divided government versus unified government. And this really has a lot to do with political parties. We have two major political parties, Republicans and Democrats. And if Republicans, for example, were to have complete control of Congress and the presidency, that would be a unified government. Think back to 2017 and 2018. Trump was the president. The Senate and the House both had a majority that were Republicans. This meant that the Republicans and Trump had a unified government. As of this year, it became a divided government. Republicans have control of the presidency, they have control of the Senate, but they don't have control of the House of Representatives. Which one do you think is easier for a government to get things done? I hope you're answering unified government. A unified government has one party in control, so of course they should be, accomplishing things in a faster manner. They should be able to get things done in a more efficient manner. In a divided government, you're going to have a whole lot more oversight. You're going to have a lot more, criticism between the Congress and the presidency. You're going to have a lot of battling and potentially negotiating between the Congress and the president. So it's not all one party working together. Some people in a divided government have gotten great things done. For example, Bill Clinton and the Republican Congress of the mid 90s were able to get a lot of things done. A lot of policies, were passed in the mid 90s. But uh, Obama and Trump have dealt with divided governments and really struggled because, you know, they've been more challenging. Um, they've been less likely to compromise and to work together on a lot of things. Parties have become a little more divided than the 1990s. And let's look at this. So you can see on this image, you can see on the top who has majority in the Senate. You can see on the bottom who has majority in the House, and you can see in the little bit in the middle who has control of the White House. So you can see right now we're in a divided government. So from 2019 to 2021, we're going to be in this divided system. Um, After 2021, who knows what it'll be. So we can see the last time though that we were divided, it was in the Obama administration. Between 2011 and 2017, you had you know you had Democrats in control of the Senate, you had Democrats in control of the presidency, but you had Republicans in control of the House. So you can have times where there's a great divide. A divided government can get a lot of things not moving smoothly whereas a unified government should be able to be more efficient. It should be able to get things done. Anyway, that's all for this video now. Let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to drop those into the Ed Puzzle. And I will hopefully see you tomorrow or later at parent-teacher conferences.